Hello YouTube. The Arctic is the northern area of the Earth, including the deep water Arctic basin, shallow marginal areas, seas with islands and adjoining parts of the continental land of Europe, Asia and Northern America. Russia has the world's longest Arctic border, which stretches more than 10,000 miles. UFOs have been sighted over the Russian Arctic territories on numerous occasions and by very reliable witnesses. After years of research, I have become convinced that UFOs and USOs as applicable are attracted to the areas of nuclear research, disasters, damage to the planet's ecology, and similar events and developments. You can only imagine how hard it is to find such information about a totalitarian state like the USSR or the People's Republic of China. And I doubt that there is really much out there about Western nations too. I'm talking about credible information. Well, same with modern Russia and China. But persistent research helps. There are certain years when UFOs have been very active around our planet in general, and the Arctic in particular, especially in the Soviet Arctic, in my motherland, the Soviet Union. 1984 was exactly such a year. I believe the reasons that UFOs had been active in the Soviet Arctic in 1984 is due in part to the nuclear accident in the forbidden Soviet territory. The naval base in Severomorsk was considered one of the most important strategic objects of the USSR. Therefore, when in May of 1984, the residents of the closed city saw the mushroom from the explosion rising into the sky, the first thought that the Americans had hit them with a nuclear strike. But what really happened? Events began to develop in the evening of May 13 at the missile and technical base of the Northern Fleet in the Okolnaya Bay. At about 18 hours 15 minutes, sailors returning from the service noticed smoke over the warehouses of military unit 63976, where missiles, mines and torpedoes were stored. The first explosion occurred at 1840 hours, after which a chain reaction began. Eyewitnesses said that the rocket boosters or missile boosters had caught fire spontaneously, flew in the air and raced along bizarre trajectories. Fortunately, most of the ammunition fell into the remote hills. The entire Northern Fleet was put in a state of full combat readiness, which is declared only at the beginning of the war. The captains were ordered to take the ships away from the land. At the coast, the command left only the cruiser Kirov, which had a missile defense system on board. It was supposed to protect the city from falling shells. At the same time, the civilian population left Severomorsk in a panic, initially perceiving that what was happening was as a colorful firework, but later they understood it was not. Events culminated on May 17 when a separate warehouse with explosives allegedly exploded. According to later estimates, the force of the explosion was equivalent to 3 nuclear charges. In Severomorsk, almost all the windows were broken. The city was saved from more serious damage by the fact that the residential buildings were located a few kilometers from Okolnaya. The fire was finally extinguished only a week later. Only 2 people were officially reported dead, 1 sailor and 1 captain. Ramin Jabrailov was the sailor and captain was Viktor Sadovlakov. Meanwhile, experts say that there were about 200 to 300 dead. These were mainly firefighters and technicians who were sent to disassemble and neutralize ammunition. The city was saved from a more serious damage by the fact that residential buildings were located a few kilometers from Okolnaya. The fire was finally extinguished only a week later. The victims, however, could have been many times more if the toxic cloud formed as a result of the fire, and if it was not carried into the sea. Since the incident happened at the secret military facility, it was all hushed up. In the USSR, only local residents and relatives of the sailors whispered about the explosion. There were the most incredible rumors. For example, according to one version, the warehouse with anti-aircraft warheads was set on fire by the Americans, pointing a laser beam at it. However, the military experts who conducted the investigation declared a violation of the rules for storing ammunition as the cause of the fire. The fleet command even posted on the stand the names of the privates and officers who allegedly smoked at the post on that ill-fated day. The characteristic shape of the plumes of smoke that rose over the city led the North Sea residents to assume that the Cold War had suddenly turned into a hot one. Even now, looking at the pictures of the mushrooms taken by the sailors, it is not difficult to imagine that it was the Americans to blame. That's what the Russians think. However, during the fire, there was a very real danger of detonation of nuclear charges stored in warehouses. And although the Chernobyl scenario was avoided, some leakage of radioactive materials may still have occurred. In particular, the magazine Огонек reported years later about the sailor Viktor Ponomarev, who was in the area of the fire and who died a year after the tragedy from acute leukemia. This disease often develops after ionizing radiation. One way or another, the sailors of the Northern Fleet lost half of their weapons overnight. If at that moment a potential enemy really started a war with the Soviet Union, its chances of victory would be greatly increased. In addition, the conduct of many naval officers in the X hour was far from perfect. Instead of following orders, they chose to travel to Murmansk in their own cars. The commission for debriefing, so to say, created later, punished a number of officers by demotion, but this did not negate the fact that in the event of a real nuclear strike, the Soviet fleet could simply run away. I found an interesting commentary on the Russian Naval Veterans online forums from an eyewitness. He stated that on May 18, 1984, that's according to him, a triple explosion occurred at a weapons base in Okolnaya base Severomorsk. And he succinctly continued, brief results in the words of eyewitnesses and rumors. The number of dead and those who died from injuries is about 200 people. There was a natural mushroom cloud from the explosion. The flying missile launch tubes, rusty remnants he personally observed in the hills near Okolnaya when he was collecting mushrooms. There were about almost all the windows in Severomorsk were broken. The 7th Navy Squadron absconded in a matter of minutes. They even saw non-combat ships fleeing away. And a string of cars on the road to Murmansk. And he says, evil tongues say that among the escaping ones, there were many political education officers, those who promoted communist ideology among the troops. The Russian eyewitness challenged others at the forum to add information or to refute what he stated. So we now know that a highly unusual event, maybe a nuclear explosion, took place in the Soviet Arctic in 1984. And UFOs have been sighted in the nation throughout that year. And perhaps this occurrence attracted the uninvited guests to the area. I want to bring to your attention now a Soviet Vice Admiral whom I described in my earlier videos some years ago, and his tremendously important revelations to the Russian media, which he made not long before he died in 2014. It was Lev Matushkin, a brave and experienced officer of the Soviet Navy. As was his son-in-law, also brave during their service. But before we look at what the son-in-law observed in 1984, let's look at the achievements and observations of the Vice Admiral, who provided a most important disclosure. In the area of Novaya Zemlya, he observed a multifaceted, huge egg-shaped object emerge from the water and go into the clouds. The navigator there managed to take a picture. Photos and notes from all the eyewitnesses from the submarine's crew were sent to the Academy of Sciences, USSR, but they received neither any acknowledgement nor recognition from the Soviet Academy of Sciences. Now, so that you know, the Soviet test of the 50 megaton nuclear bomb took place at the top secret military training ground on Novaya Zemlya in the Arctic Ocean in 1961 and continued from then on. Today, the Novaya Zemlya archipelago is home to the central test site of the Russian Ministry of Defense, also referred to as Object 700. Now, in the 2010 and later, American intelligence several times stated that Russia continues to conduct nuclear tests at the site at Novaya Zemlya. The Russian authorities perceived such statement as an attempt by the United States to find a reason to withdraw from the Offensive Arms Reduction Treaty, START 3, or to refuse to conclude a new such agreement. According to the statement of the American intelligence services, it was about the so-called subcritical nuclear test, otherwise called the non-nuclear explosive. In any event, UFOs have been known to visit such testing grounds throughout the USSR. You can see this evidence in my videos. What is important, a giant UFO emerging from the ocean was photographed by the most outstanding Soviet submariner, his crew. But he did not reveal the date of the UFO-USO observation near Novaya Zemlya. Now, on another occasion, Lev Matushkin also observed for about 30 minutes in the area of Greenland an object that was moving in the water at a speed of more than 300 knots, about 600 kilometers an hour. At the same time, it did not make the noise, the usual noise, but it made the noise more like a jet of water. He believes that these are manifestations of another civilization, either underwater or one coming from outer space. Let's briefly look at who was Lev Matushkin. He was hero of the Soviet Union since 1982. As a youth, he was able to join the Red Army and fight Nazi invaders at the front by changing his real age. As a cabin boy, he completed the training task better than an experienced naval officer, for which, at a very young age, he began a career in command positions in the Soviet Navy. At the age of 25, he was recognized as the best navigator of the Northern Fleet. He was not just some kind of captain of a nuclear submarine, but the commander of the submarine flotilla of the Northern Fleet of the USSR. It was the first to pass autonomously under the Arctic ice. For the first time, he successfully fired a salvo of ballistic missiles with a maximum rate of fire. He had the rank of Vice Admiral since 1976, and from July 1984 to December 1990, Matushkin headed the top secret and enigmatic research center of the USSR Ministry of Defense. Here is something interesting too. After he retired, among other civic activities, Lev Matushkin was an advisor to the chairman of the Committee for Assistance to Law Enforcement Agencies in the fight against organized crime and corruption. So he was a very serious eyewitness, someone to reckon with, someone to listen to. There is a very tenacious, feisty, thorough, detailed, knowledgeable, dedicated, independent UFO researcher in Russia. His name is Hudoy. He was also investigating Matushkin observations and found details about his son-in-law. I learned this not that long ago. Hudoy had interesting observations about the UFO or USO witnessed by the Vice Admiral. As for the UFO emerging from under the water, in addition to Lev Matushkin, there are other materials of evidence but there are few of them. But there's quite a lot of information about, registered underwater objects moving at the speed of an airplane down there. You can see that in my videos and books. Here is what Hudoy thought. A lot of information about UFO sightings in the Navy is described in the Russian documentary UFO Going Underwater. That is, the name refers to objects diving from the sky into the water. This is of course interesting, but in general, there's a high probability that a meteorite or fragments of a rocket or other known objects descended under the water. But flying from under the water is quite another matter. This is clearly something otherworldly production, especially considering the size of the object, because it was huge according to Matushkin. Also, the case of Matushkin is interesting because the emerging UFO was photographed. But how to get those photos? If anybody can help with this, please let us know, concluded Hudoy. Now, Matushkin's daughter-in-law is married to Captain First Rank Valery Stoyanov, a descendant of the Volga-Bulgarian people. Valery Stoyanov, who was born in the city of Polyarny, now resides in Moscow and serves in one of the units of the Ministry of Emergency Situations of Russia. He's always ready for emergencies after his military underwater service, according to Nikolai Cherkashin. More about him later. I found scant information about Stoyanov, but this is no ordinary Russian Navy captain too. His mission was teaching Americans a lesson they would not forget. That's the official, albeit little known version of the events. During the hottest days of the Cold War, it was something like Khrushchev's actions in 1962, but 22 years later. That took place in 1984. Look, a ballistic missile submarine is a submarine capable of deploying submarine-launched ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads. K-240 or 240 is the Soviet ballistic missile submarine that Captain Stoyanov was entrusted with to stealthily conduct. He was entrusted to conduct a huge submarine of 16,000 tons with 16 ballistic missiles in the mines and in one of the narrow straits between the islands that separate the Caribbean Sea from the Atlantic, from the Sargasso Sea. It was a suicide mission, because if the Americans would have revealed their presence, would have found them out, Stoyanov would have been punished back home, and of course get no medals for it. He could not even get a first mate to accompany him. Initially he was looking around as people were simply afraid, and the superiors told him that he is experienced and can pull it through himself. So 1984, the height of the European missile crisis. General Secretary of the Soviet Central Committee of the Communist Party, Yuri Andropov, decides to teach American politicians a new lesson. If Nikita Khrushchev chose the super powerful hydrogen bomb detonated in 1962 on Novaya Zemlya as the lesson to the Americans, and then the ballistic missiles deployed in Cuba, then Yuri Andropov bet on a nuclear-powered strategic missile submarines. This was a big card game, and aces or trumps were being played. The continuous Soviet rocket caravan that plied both the US ocean coast became a routine adequate measure. Okay? But the Kremlin had to come up with something out of the ordinary. And in the main headquarters of the Soviet Navy, they came up with the idea to send a 16 missile submarine to the Caribbean Sea. If the American missiles aimed at the USSR from West Germany and Turkey are a Colt pistol pointed at the Kremlin's temple, then the submarine launch site of the southern coast of America is a razor at the throat of the White House. The approach time of the missiles from the K-240 silos was less than 1 minute. and no missile defense system could intercept them. Now listen carefully to what Stoyanov told Nikolai Cherkashin, famous Russian author and a former Navy officer, in an interview. I will skip the mission preparation details, but Stoyanov learned that the utmost secrecy was broken and top secret mission details were leaked, probably due to psychological warfare, an asset of the Cold War. So they hint at intentional leakage. And so, in 1984, the submarine left Gadzhievo, plunged into the Barents Sea, and moved to the North Atlantic and to the Sargasso Sea. The 19th Division of the 3rd Nuclear Submarine Flotilla could well be called the Sargasso Sea Division. It was there in the legendary sea inhabited by relict monsters and giant algae that the Gadzhiev missile submarines had to operate. They were able to evade the Americans who were waiting for the Soviet submarine. Okay, they were waiting for Stoyanov. K240 spent more than a month in the Caribbean, 40 days. The Caribbean Sea seems to be bordered by deep depressions, the Venezuelan, Colombian, Yucatan, with the exception of its western part, where there are quite a lot of reef islands. The Soviet nuclear-powered ship moved along the circumference of the Caribbean Sea, along the very edge of the territorial waters located on its shores. It was most peaceful combat service. Stoyanov grinned when telling this to Cherkashin. No enemy sonar, overflights, no search operations. They managed to get safely out of the Caribbean and out of the Sargasso Sea also. The Soviets returned to Gadzhievo on time. Stoyanov reported on the task done, a mission accomplished, as it should be done. The commander of the 3rd Flotilla, Vice Admiral Ivan Litvinov, they lovingly called him Dad. Stoyanov he shook Stoyanov's hand and said, "Forget where you were and don't tell anyone anything." Stoyanov was presented to the Order of the Red Banner, but he was not destined to receive that award. He was harassed by an inspector from the Political Education Department, and in return, Stoyanov sent him to hell. And as such, Stoyanov was labeled as politically immature and as someone who does not understand the leading role of the Communist Party. So he was not awarded the Order of the Red Banner. But Stoyanov added that they did not serve their country for the orders and medals. And here is what Cherkashin said after the interview. The passage of the voyage of the K240 nuclear submarine to the Caribbean Sea is unique. No one ever went there again. We had a long discussion with Stoyanov about how he managed to complete this almost impossible task. We concluded that the entire anti-submarine armada, which was deployed beyond the Mona Strait, was not seriously looking for a Russian nuclear submarine. The American naval commanders did not believe that the Russians would take such an unthinkable step to lead a camel through the eye of a needle. They say that the intention to break into the Caribbean Sea is nothing more than a disinformation campaign. That's what Cherkashin said. Now, I'll tell you what I think after I present Khudoy's information about Captain Stoyanov. The Russian researcher had a very hard time locating him, as the former naval captain is not active in the internet, but his daughter is, and Khudoy talked to her a few times before she and her mother cut off communications with him. I will not reveal their names. There is no reason for them to get disturbed. But here's what Stoyanov's daughter did reveal to the researcher. She learned it from her father. During a training exercise in the north in 1984, my father made a training launch of a ballistic missile. The launch was filmed on video. It was visible on radar, but at the fifth second of the flight, the rocket simply disappeared in full view of all observers, and the roar of its engines too disappeared. All personnel returned to the base, and investigation began, but it was realized that the fault of the personnel was not present. For this launch, my father received an F, although no personnel errors were found in the launch. The Moscow Commission checked it. Well, Khudoy asked Stoyanov's daughter 5 clarifying questions about this story, which he requested that she would pose to her father to find out. 1. Is it possible? And where to find the video of the launch? 2. What was the rocket or missile model? 3. The exact date and time of the launch. 4. From which submarine was the launch made? 5. Can you name people who can confirm this story? Well, she stopped communicating with the UFO researcher. Khudoy summed it up. Both cases are recorded in photos, videos, although more often the aliens block our photo and video equipment. Both cases occurred during a nuclear weapons test. Why? In his opinion, in this way, the aliens show us their serious attitude to nuclear weapons. They suggest that they are tracking our games with fire, us playing with fire, and demonstrate that they are able to intercept a missile so that nothing remains of it. Do you remember my video about the 1950 incident when a Soviet airplane just disappeared in view of observers in the area of the Kuril Islands? Anyway, back to Khudoy. The fact that the aliens accompany major military exercises is stated by many former high-ranking military personnel. However, they report this when they are already in reserve or retired. It was forbidden to speak about it during the active service. Okay, that's Khudoy's. And here's what I'll tell you. Based on years of my research, Stoyanov witnessed something that he was not supposed to, and has been ordered not to reveal anymore. I wonder what he observed in the waters of the Sargasso Sea, and whether it was his submarine that discovered the ancient underwater road near the Yucatan. There have been rumors about Soviet submarines discovering things down there that pertain to what we call ancient civilizations. Let's not go more than that. Now, yes, he most likely observed something there. Just like his father-in-law had witnessed something shocking and unexpected. Of course, the Academy of Sciences would not have responded to him. Do you think the eggheads in the Academy understand what the uninvited guests that lurk in the waters of our oceans really are? Some do, of course. And you can find out more in my videos and books. And here is an episode from 1984 that was disclosed by a real scientist and a decent person. You can find out more information about it in the book Russia's USO Secrets, co-authored by me and Philip Mental. But here's what I'll tell you. Valery Lukin is the head of Russia's Arctic and Antarctic research. The Russian scientist, a seasoned researcher and top expert, personally observed a UFO over the Arctic Ocean. His sighting took place late October 1984. Lukin and his colleagues were returning aboard a helicopter from the field work in the Laptev Sea to the base airport. They saw a very large gathering, everyone there excited while engaged in discussions. When Lukin's team climbed the air traffic control tower, they learned that the military radar unit had detected an object on the radar. It maneuvered rapidly in azimuth and altitude. While the scientists discussed their plans to fly to the landing site of the strange object, it landed about 40 kilometers from the airport. The border guards reported that they see fire where the landing took place. When the scientific team actually flew to the site, they noticed a sphere. It emitted luminescence, but it was not a directed effect as a projector would generate. It seemed as if the sphere radiated with an inner, brightly crimson glow. The sphere did not let their helicopter come close. The glow was extinguished when the flight time needed to reach it was about 3 minutes. The scientists hovered around the area aboard the helicopter, used headlights for illumination, but were not precisely certain what they had to find. They came back the next day, following the same course, but found no traces of the event. Okay? And here is something else from 1984 that I discovered not long ago thanks to my Ukrainian colleagues from the wonderful Novosti Ufology website. The Yugorsky Strait, or Yugor Strait, in Russian, Yugorsky Shar, is a narrow inlet between the Kara Sea and the Pechora Sea. Its maximum width is 10 kilometers and its minimum width only 3 kilometers. And Ostrov Starozhivoy, an island 1.6 kilometers inland, lies in the middle of the strait. This inlet separates Vaygach Island from the Yugorsky Peninsula on the Russian mainland. The name is derived from Yugaria, an old name for the region to the south of Yugorsky Strait. So, here there's a good description. On the gentle shore of the strait is one of the oldest polar stations, which in the Arctic is briefly called U-Shar. Through the U-Shar Strait, ships leave the Barents Sea for the Kara Sea. After 80 years, that is in 1993, the polar station was liquidated and all the equipment was transported, mainly to Belinos and Amderno. Then, after some time, on the site of the former polar station, the border post Yugorsky Shar appeared and existed until 2002. But it was abandoned too. I wonder why. Now there is nothing there except for the dilapidated buildings and remnants of equipment. But I am positive with the new expansion of the Arctic, of the Russian power in the Arctic, people will come back. Listen to this. In 1985, Alexander Dmitrievich Chulov, film operator, who at the time resided in Kiev, he wrote a letter to the Ukrainian Soviet Academy of Sciences. Here's what it says. When he was in the expedition in 1984 in Arkhangelsk, he heard a story from one of his colleagues who shot films in Yugorsky Shar. And there had been inexplicable events more than once that involved employees of the polar station. One of the events or occurrences is as such: a meteorologist, having left the station, got lost among the ice floes, and after several days of wandering, he observed bright light illuminating the surrounding area, like during the day. He doesn't remember what happened after. Well, the search and rescue operation by then were completed as they understood that he should have undeniably perished among ice without food and heat. But they did find him. The meteorologist walked briskly, full of strength and energy, not at all suffering from cruel cold weather. The only thing he remembered from his journey is the bright light that illuminated the ice floes. There is so much more in the Russian Arctic, and you can see it in my videos in my channel, and of course I will continue my research. But something interesting did happen in 1984, and as I always say, I don't think that all this Cold War rivalry, at the very top, they stayed in touch, and sometimes I'm sure they had conducted missions together. I thank you for your attention. If you can, please support my research. There are links in the description to this video. And I will work to bring you more fascinating videos about UFOs and USOs, the uninvited guests who lurk in the sky and in the waters of our planet. Thank you.